Welcome, everyone, back to the Why I Don't Like podcast. I'm your host, Christian Ashley, here to entertain you as I sit down and record episodes on the media that I consume and yet I don't like. Now, you may have noticed there's been a huge schedule slip of sorts. A lot of that is on me, a lot of that is on seminary, and just now finally having the time, now that I'm no longer in that semester, to actually focus on this again. So, I just had to make some choices on, what to focus on, what not to focus on, in the midst of, taking classes, getting work done for school, volunteering at church, preparing sermons, preparing things for Let Nothing Move You and in systematic ecology and friends and family. And pretty much everything else was just conspiring to say, you're not doing this right now. Just slow down. You can come back to it later. So thanks for coming back. I'm very appreciative of that you've stuck with me in what was essentially 3 months of silence. So that was also on me not mentioning why I wasn't able to record. So if this happens to be your first episode, welcome. We're a podcast dedicated to discussing things that I watched and I quite or read and quite didn't like. And my goal here isn't to be like, hey, I hate everything and that's why it sucks and therefore you should never listen or watch these things. Like, no, my point is hopefully to convey, why I don't like these things, how they can improve on themselves. And for those of you who don't know, we are discussing Mushoku Tensei, Jobless Reincarnation. We are currently still in season one, part two, episodes 18 through 20. Uh, just as a reminder before we continue on here, there are no edits done for this show. I'm not an editor. I don't have someone else who can handle the editing for this, that would do it for free. So you're just stuck with what we have here. So if that's something that offends you, like, I go in peace. Now, since this tends to sometimes be a little negative, one thing I do like to do when I'm starting these things is to start with a show that I do like. And since we're doing anime, I'm going to go with some of my favorites. And that one of those favorites would be Gunbuster. I really hope I haven't done this before, but yeah, I can't remember everything I covered before about things I like, but Gunbuster is my favorite mecha anime of all time. And that's why I hate Die Buster. And I don't know if I ever want to cover that and why I don't like. But for the second, Gunbuster is an excellent series. Focusing on humanity as we've realized there's an alien threat coming after us, and it follows two young girls as they're being trained to become pilots for the mechas of the series to go and then fight against this alien threat. There's lots of things with time dilation, and just general strife between characters. And a great mecha action. This is one of the finest shows ever made. Yes, an OVA. It's only like 6 episodes, but it's still well worth your time. So that is something I do like. Now, something I don't like is that we continue to be in Mushoku Tensei. We're still only in season one. There's another reason I wish I had more time to get through this, but it just conspired against me. So today we're going to be in episode 18, Separate Journeys. Now, we start with the reconciliation between Paul and Rudius as we then move on during the intro to see that our team of Rudius, Rugerd, and Eris city where they encounter a man named Auber who claims to be the North God Kallman's pupil. So he challenges Rugerd to a fight, which he promptly loses very easily. And as consolation, Rudius gives him a figure of Rugerd to take after the fight, showing his appreciation for the Superb. They did encounter another man who challenges Rugerd once more, and then another until Rugerd just beats them all up along the way. And this is our opening scene for this episode. And, as far as Mushoku Tensei goes, this is pretty solid. Because you get the idea of, dead end of Rugerd, this guy spoken of in whispers. Of course, there would be people out there in the world who would want to challenge him, who would want to, like, say, I'm the guy who actually took him down. I'm the guy who beat Dead End. Like, yeah, this makes perfect sense to me. Most people would say, no, I ain't going near him or anything, but there's always those braggarts out there. So as far as openings go, this was fine. It was even funny. So yeah, I did quite like that. We then move forward to the group now on a boat. Eris once more afflicted by seasickness as she asks Rudius to help her out in the midst of this, but he's suffering too in the midst of the storm, unable to heal himself. Like they're both suffering from that seasickness. And Rudius notices that Ruijerd himself doesn't look that bad, as Ruijerd notes that he doesn't understand why they do. I mean, just different biologies working there, which is a fun little bit of world building. Differences between humans and demons and stuff like that. Yeah, that's perfectly fine. One thing I will praise this series on is that some of its world building is quite fascinating, and quite interesting. So that works for me pretty well. And Rudius tells Ruijerd that he's glad that he was finally able to come on the boat with them this time. Uh, that Paul was actually useful in helping him have this thing happen this way, which makes Ruijerd remark that Rudius shouldn't be speaking ill of his father, which Rudius says is just a result of their relationship with one another. They've always had a kind of antagonistic, like, yeah, we're father and son, but we're going to mess with each other in a different way than other father son relationships would do that. It's more harsh, but yeah, it is totally them to do that. So they are about to reach the central continent, which Rudius says has major rice production. But this talk of food makes Eris upset, and she continues to throw up overboard the ship. And Rudius himself muses that he doesn't know where anyone else in his family is, and decides he needs to think positively, and that he knows Roxy's there, or so he thinks. It's not his fault that they just didn't happen to cross paths while they're on the demon continent. So, speaking of Roxy, we didn't see her talking to Nokopara, reminiscing of their time together as an adventuring group, and as the last one's left of it. And I think they mentioned that the rest had died or something like that. I'd have to rewatch the episode for that. So Nokopara tells her that she's grown more mature, and Roxy reflects on how she's grown up. They make fun of each other and banter back and forth and enjoy each other's company. And he talks about how he got burned years. And this was weird to me. I'm not entirely certain what this was. Maybe a subtitle thing, a fan translation, maybe that I got wrong, or who knows in this regard. He says years ago he was, burned by a party named Dead End, which raises Roxy's fears as a result of that. So I think there maybe it was months, or maybe it's meant a year. I'm real. I don't know about that. We'll get to that when we get into the critiques on this part here. And then Nokopara then asks her if she's seen her family, which Roxy tells him that she hasn't, and he counsels her to do so, which was a nice moment for him. Give him a bit of an extra character and what we saw beyond him dealing with our dead end party there. He then explains that he grew up and became a family man, so she should learn from that and love her parents. Even if she can't use telepathy, because she'll regret it if she doesn't go. Now, some things I want to point out here. We kind of get that scene at the beginning of this, where between Ruijerd and Rudius on kind of on parenting, and that's one of the things that Ru Rudius's and Paul's relationship is something I talked about before, but it's something that does irk me at times. And once again, it's affected by the fact that one party here knows more than the other and isn't willing to share. So Paul doesn't really get why his son is the way he is. He just thinks he's kind of weird, so he lashes out against that instead of realizing, oh, there's another mind in there that is merged with what would have been my son in many respects. And that's why he's always been more mature. That's why he's always been like me in that circumstance of acting older sexually and all these things. Like, I don't like it because Paul's not a perfect parent. We've talked about it multiple times over here, but he deserves better from his son, who, by the way, I'll say it again, is mentally older than his dad. So yeah, Rudy has had a messed up life in his past life where he is unnamed Japanese man, and I'm still going to rag on that. But you got to think over those years, something had to have given. What like he would have said something to, even not to him, to Zenith, someone in the family. But yet this entire time, no one knows but him, and that's extremely frustrating. Because then you get to someone like Rushard here, who obviously I don't know if the whole like isekai thing would really mess with him that much. But he sees a son challenging his father, and as Ruijerd is someone who has lost all of his family, there's something about him like reaching out to Rudius and be like, "Hey, like treat your dad better. Like he doesn't deserve what you're doing." Because you can afford to talk to your dad that way because he's still alive. So I don't know exactly where to go from here other than to say that there's just so much that could be fixed here if Rudius would just be honest with Paul, with himself, and yet he's just crippling himself for no good reason at all. So that's that. Now, this is some timeline issues, things like I brought up earlier with the Nokopara thing, um, where there's like a discrepancy in the years thing that may have just been a year because from what I looked up online, the teleport incident, the Mana Cataclysm, happened in K417, which I believe is the numbering system for their years. And Roxy, who is going to return to her parents in this year, is in K418. So if that's like something, the writer honestly got mixed up on, like I'm not going to rag too much on that because I get it. I'm bad at keeping track of time as well. Like one of my books, like the first one I ever wrote, um, our main character had to deal with the fact that he's 100+ years removed from where he was in time and has no memory of like 8 years before then. So I'm having to think 800, 108 years, 109 years, 110. And then when I'm writing sequels to that, I have to be mindful of that. And I got the numbers wrong in my first, drafts because I suck at keeping track of numbers. So like, especially years too, I get it. So I'm gonna throw some grace that way to him. Like maybe it's a mistranslation thing. Maybe he actually got it right, and I'm just making something out of nothing, which would also be very in character for me. So there's that. Now, one thing I do want to talk about before we actually get into the rest of this episode is the kind of the focus that we get on Roxy's growth as a character. Now, I was actually thinking about this earlier today as I was writing some of this down. Like, out of our main three female cast, outside of Zenith and Lily and them, Roxy, Sylphie, and Eris. I was debating which one do I think actually shows the most growth as a character through not just what we've seen here, but what I know overall. And I want to say it's Roxy. And I can really appreciate that while she's right here in her character arc, because I have issues later on. But right now, this is well done with her. It's like, hey, you haven't talked to your parents in all these years. And we kind of see there's something weird, like, oh, you can't talk to him telepathically. What does that mean? We're going to find out in the rest of the episode what that actually means. But like, Nokapara actually speaks out and with some wisdom to his friend and tells her, hey, like, buck up, talk to your family. And she realizes that she's not the same kid she was then, and she can actually do something about it. So yeah, she's searching for Rudius, but she's close to home. Why didn't she go to her parents? Like, what is she so afraid of? And yeah, there's going to be issues for doing so, but like, I think ultimately throughout this series that I have watched so far, because once again, I have not read the light novels or read any of the manga. I want to say Roxy is the one out of our main three female cast members that grows the most, and this episode is really a part of that. So to continue on in this episode, we see Roxy returning to her village, and she kind of notes that hasn't really changed that much, and it's just as quiet as she remembers. And as she's passing by, some of her own people try to speak to her telepathically, and sorry, I'm trying to look at my notes here. What did I mess up here? So they didn't leave her when she doesn't actually respond to them telepathically because she literally can't. And Roxy remarks that she doesn't like her village. She didn't watch some kids play and sees a rock where she once drew on with a stone. And it kind of makes her happy for a little bit until she notices one of the kids get hurt. So she goes to help him. But when they attempt to speak to her telepathically and thanks, all it does is cause her pain. And she runs away to her house. She enters and greets her parents, who kind of awkward at first at her return. But her mother asks how she's been, which opens up the conversation, and they tell her to stay as long as she likes, unknowingly making her upset by speaking telepathically to each other, which makes her want to leave and say she says that she's never going to return. But her mother stops her and asks her to come home, at least every 20 years because they do live for a fairly long time. It's just 50, which makes them happy as her mother cries from joy at seeing her again. And Roxy notes that, they still keep her doll that she had forever ago on full display. I think we had a scene earlier where she was shown playing with it or something like that. In flashback, we see her learning to speak out loud, but her attempts to speak orally with the people of the village fail, which makes her upset. And that she thinks this somehow makes her a bad girl. And, she kind of reflects on all of this and, like, what does it mean for me to be like this? And she then thinks about how she ran away from home because of this whole ordeal. And she just hated how her, disability to an extent really hurt her parents and how they had to wrestle with it, how she had to wrestle with it. And in the present, she starts to cry too and, hugs her mother and apologizes for how she left to both of them, as they realize that, excuse me, as she realizes that, really at the end of the day, words don't matter that much. This is the best part of the episode. Uh, no holds barred. This is exactly the kind of good writing I would expect from a different kind of series. But this is hindered by other things that happen later on to Roxy's character and other things that happen overall in Mushoku Tensei. But right now, right here and now, this is good because this is such an interesting premise. You have this entire tribe of demon people who communicate telepathically, and there's one person there who can't. And like it really is to them a disability. And to see her like wrestling through this process of why am I different? What's wrong with me? Am I a bad girl? Does it like she doesn't say this, but like you could probably think, do the gods hate me or something like that? Like, what did I do wrong for this to happen? And I think it's played quite brilliantly here. And it shows her inner turmoil. Goodness gracious, cannot speak today, and how her parents are having to suffer through this too, and how they still loving her, they're teaching her how to speak regularly, but they will always share something that she can never attain because they can speak telepathically to one another and to the rest of the people in their village. So it's no wonder that Roxy, ran away and tried to become an adventurer and a mage and all these things. Because why? How can you stick in that environment where it feels like even though you've done literally nothing wrong, it feels like you have? So I completely and utterly understand that process of why she would choose to do what things she does. So once again, like I know the show is called Why I Don't Like, but once again, I want to show the things that I do like because when you do something well, it should be praised. When we do something bad, it should be criticized. This is good, and trust me, there's some bad coming up later on. I'm going to have some words about, but for right now, I like what they're doing, and as we continue on through the episode, we see Roxy, wake up in the morning and leaves a little after breakfast that she needs to look for her missing apprentice. As they tell her that they were visited by a kid named Rudius, who was there a while back, which makes her excited and upset at the same time, as she literally just missed him. And they tell her about Ruchard, which kind of makes her afraid. Naturally, she always had this huge fear of the Supered. Being raised by them, they thought the same thing too until they met him. But after speaking with her parents, it helps her understand the situation a little better and kind of starts destroying some of the prejudices that she has against the Supered. And as she leaves, Roxy's mother asks her to bring Rudius, which makes her father upset, given the implications of, kind of the mother, like, oh, you should probably shack up with that boy there and get married. Now, she then realizes that Dead End is Rudius's party, which she says is such a Rudius move to make. And I agree with her. It makes perfect sense for him to do what he did. She then returns uh, to goodness gracious. I'm forgetting exactly what I put down on my notes here. Oh, Elenice. Alina Lise. Goodness gracious. Uh, who is at her usual sexual foolishness and attacks her again with magic, meaning she has to pay for the damages again. Haha, it's so funny. They didn't leave to find the other members of, Rudius's family, and she knows he's safe, and they have to find the other members of his family first. So here we have at the end of this episode a nice scene between Roxy and her family once more. Some light teasing from her mom. Um, which is very inappropriate given how old Rudius is and how old Roxy is. But that's its own thing. But then we get to Alina Lee's. And there is a reason, I probably said this before, there's a reason for her actions. There's a reason that she does the things that she does. It still doesn't make it good, and we'll get there when we get there. But I want to focus on how women are kind of treated in this as a whole. And look, like, hey, men and women, we are sexual beings. That is how we're wired. That's how God designed us. That's a great and beautiful thing in the proper context. And we get into stuff like this where it's kind of feeling like the only value that women have at times is not 100%. Do not hear that the only thing Mushoku Tensei cares about is this part of women. But it feels at certain point in times like that's true. And it's not because, hey, I was just praising the episode earlier for how it's treating her, beyond her as a sexual object until we get to 2 episodes from now. But it's this idea of this is how they're supposed to act, and they're supposed to be sexually free, and they're supposed to be with everyone that they want to be, and all this. And it gets more ridiculous as the series goes on, and I really despise how that's done because we had such a nice setup in this episode. You won a lot of brownie points from me, and how you handled Roxy's background, how she's struggling with what is essentially a disability in her own village that makes her different than other people, that makes her want to go into a world that is completely and utterly different from where she's at, just because it's normal to talk to other people out loud and to hang out with them in that way. That makes perfect sense. But her response to sex, her response to stuff like that is weird and strange. And I really don't like how it's handled later on, but we'll get there when we get there. So we'll get to grades later on. It's not a high grade. Well, actually, no, I think this one's actually, comparatively speaking, pretty high. So that brings us to episode 19, which is Route Selection. Now we see Rudius once more in the dream world where he meets with the man god who says it's been a year since they last talked, and Rudius got his new eye. And Rudius is upset once more because he ended up in prison and had to fight with his father. And the man god laughs at how entertaining Rudius's life is to him. So, in the process of all this, Rudius looks down on himself, sees that he's back in his original old self, and he gets angry at seeing himself because he despises seeing his old body. Some of that understandable. Other than that, that's on you, man. And as he gets angry, he then calms down a little bit and says that he's grateful for the man God's help because he got more information, he got stuff done. The demon eye is a pretty cool thing. And they talk about Rudius's family's whereabouts, where the man God teases Rudius about how he doesn't care about his family from Japan, which gets Rudius angrier, and he asks about his real family in this world. The man God then tells Rudius he'll reveal that information, but only if he trusts him the next time that they speak. And Rudius says that he'll consider it. The man God then says that's good enough for him and tells Rudius that he will meet Aisha, his younger sister, and tells him not to tell her his real name, but that if he wants to find her in Lilia and Shirone, then this is what has to happen, and he has to send a letter to someone he knows inside of the palace. Rudius then wakes up on the ship they're on and gets seasick once more, where he tells Ruijerd nothing's wrong. Now, this opening scene, I think, is for the most part played fairly well. The interactions, we get the return of the man god and his interactions with Rudius. Those are well done because the man god's kind of pointing out some good things here. It's like, oh, you care about your family here, but I don't know. You ever think about your family back in Japan? But you let down your, don't know if, I think it's just brother, right? I have to look that up again. Like, oh, no concern about them, but you're concerned about the people here. Like, not to say you shouldn't be concerned about them, but it's kind of telling. You haven't once asked about anyone over there or anything like that. And I think that's just one of the despicable aspects of Rudius is that he doesn't care about his family. Uh, back in Japan. He never really reflects on that much throughout all of this. So, yeah, of course. I think the man God's got a really good point here. I'm still in the belief that he is ultimately working against Rudius and allowing these good things to happen so that eventually Rudius stops being as argumentative against him and starts trusting him a little more. So we'll see if I'm right. Now, yeah. So, and this is a good thing too, because we are getting progress on finding other members of the family. So Lilia and Aisha, mother, daughter, half sister. I had something I was going to say. Sorry, getting old in my old age here. My memory starts to fade. So forget about what I was going to say because I've forgotten about it. So we'll continue on, and they reach the central continent as the opening starts to play. And Eris is very grateful to be back on land. I feel you, girl. They then travel, eating some rice that was mentioned earlier, which reminds kind of can tell through like his facial expressions because I don't think it really lingers on this that this does remind Rudius of home to an extent. They then enter the capital of the Sharona Kingdom, and Rudius figures that if excuse me, yeah, and Rudius figures out that Roxy's probably who the man God wants him to speak to, although he figures out reasonably that she should have found Aisha and Lilia if they'd been there, not knowing that she hasn't been there for some time. So that's not on him that he doesn't know that information. He tells the group about where his family's at and sends a letter to the palace and goes to look for Aisha as he realizes he's being followed by someone and runs into an alleyway and erects a rock wall to protect himself until he realizes, as he hears a young girl crying out for help on the other side, and then kind of opens up there to see her being accosted and she's holding on to this letter um, that she just needs help, and he intervenes when she comes right behind him in like a like protect me kind of way, and he then gives her what she wants, and he then uses some incantationless magic, which makes them realize who he is because they have heard of someone like him, and they're being he and Aisha then run away as they're pursued, and he uses earth magic to escape in a very cool enough animated sequence where they use it to essentially like leap away magically. She then introduces herself as Aisha, and he realizes she's about 6 years old right now and very perceptive. He introduces himself as Shadow Moon Knight, which is something that easily impresses her. Being young and not jaded. It's one of those things. Oh, he's acting cool when obviously it's a little cringe, but it's fine. He's a 6-year old. What do you expect her to do? She then asks him to help her save her mother, and she's been trying to send a letter to her father to save them. And Rudy's asked if she knows Roxy or has an older brother to rely on, but she says he's not going to be the one to help her, which of course makes him upset because he literally did just that, which is true. And when he asks her why, like she doesn't, think of her brother as someone who could protect her or as a good man, Aisha speaks of a special box that belongs to her brother that her mother takes care of that contains some panties in it. And thus he must be a bad person and calls him a pervert. Which, I mean, if the shoe fits, I, I'm on her side. And hearing this, it makes Rudius realize that's why the man God told him not to tell her his name, which maybe, just maybe, if this were me, if someone told me not to do that, and this is the reason why, that would cause me to do some serious self-reflection, perhaps, on, oh, what, why wouldn't she like that? Oh, maybe I'm the one in the wrong, but no, that's not Rudius. So he then refuses to give his real name and promises to save her mother, and he tells her his alias, the Kennel Master. So let's start off here with Aisha. A strong start for her that is undercut by a line said in the next episode, but Rudius notices off the bat she's very perceptive, she's very intelligent. Um, I didn't go over it too much, but when she's talking about the panties, she also gives like the age range of the girl who would have been wearing them, which is spot on. I, I don't know how you would know that off that, but sure, I'll give it to her. And like she's kind of no nonsense to an extent, even though she's still a child. Like there's a nice little interplay there between her childishness and her like perceptiveness, which is fun. I do rather like her, as a character. She's fun. Now we get to Rudius. And what can I say that I haven't already said before? I mean, seriously, you know, I'm pretty dense at times. I wasn't the most emotionally mature person in the world when I was younger, but even I can tell in a scenario it wouldn't have been like this, but I don't know, someone was talking bad about me. It's like, oh, it's because I was doing a bad thing. I could have realized, oh, I was the one in the wrong. There's something about me that needs to change. And I am younger, remind you, than the mentally aged man who is inside of this younger body. I mean, at that point in time, it's just willful ignorance or willful evil at that point in time, just to remain who you are after being confronted multiple times over on how it is not good that you were doing these things. It is not good that you stole, this article of clothing from this young woman who was your teacher and is older than you physically. And I don't know. He sucks. He sucks. He sucks. He sucks. In this regard, there are good things about his character that I do like, and I'll talk about them in a bit. But for right now, how can you let yourself do these things? How, where is the disconnect here? How can you not have a self awareness about yourself that says, okay, if a child of this age is saying these things about me, which are objectively true, why am I not changing aspects of myself? I don't know. It's infuriating. That's why I don't like Rudius, amongst many reasons. So continuing on in the episode, Rudius then meets with Eris and Ruijerd, fills them in on what happened, and tells them that, they need to use the alias because she has a poor view of him. And Eris pipes up and says she thinks he's fine the way he is, which then immediately, immediately ruins he ruins it by being himself. You can figure out why. He begs them to wait to hear back from Roxy, calling them a bunch of hotheads because both Eris and Ruijerd want to assault the castle and, take no prisoners and get their people back and safe and cause a major international incident. But Rudius does have a wiser head to an extent we'll see in this episode. And in the morning, he's awoken by Ginger York, who works in the palace and requests him to come with her as Roxy, because she wants him there because Roxy has summoned him to come, and he promises, to introduce her to Eris, and she has woken up as well. Um, and to be safe, Ruijerd has also woken up and says, "Hey, like, buddy, like, be careful." And he says, "Yeah, sure, I'll do that." Which, the famous last words. He goes into the castle, and Ginger praises his magical skill, as Roxy had often done the same, which helps kind of like lower his guard a little bit, saying that, he was just better than hers, what Roxy had told her. He willingly gives up his staff without thinking, and then enters a room where he's met by the prince who kept molesting Roxy and has tied up Lilia. Such a great character. It took a lot of thinking on that one to make this one into reality in your world. Rudius is then predictably tricked and pushed into a hole in the floor and finds himself trapped in a magical circle that prevents them from casting. As it was intended to capture Roxy because the prince, whose name is Pax, wants to keep her with him forever and intends to use Rudius as bait and takes pleasure. Oh my gosh. As they go back and forth, Rudius takes pleasure in the fact that he was never cut by Pax. These are the exact words that are used to an extent. I think cuckolded is what's actually used here. Because that's what you're concerned with right now. Not your safety, not your life, or not, oh no, if Roxy finds out she's going to end up in trouble. Have I been cucked or not? I'm the best character in the show, Rudius. Paxton threatens to make Roxy a sex slave, and that sorry, I should have put a content warning for some of this. He threatens to rape her as well in front of Rudius, who you would think in these circumstances would be horrified by hearing these words spoken down to him by someone who has the authority to do this, as he is a prince in a kingdom and could possibly more than likely get away with these things. But instead of those things, focusing on those which would horrify any reasonable, rational person, he barely reacts to that thought and instead asks how Roxy's supposed to know that he's there, as he didn't know until just recently that she wasn't, which makes Pax pause. So he orders his men to find Aisha, and Rudius wonders if the man god pulled a fast one on him. Yeah. Against him as a man and a person in any way, shape, or form. But Rudius is smart, and he's guile, and he can trick people. And yet, not once during this whole ordeal does he think, maybe I'm walking into a trap. You could argue probably because he's too got lust on the brain and thinking of what he could do when Roxy shows up. I'm sure that's a part of it, but no, I really think this is making writing a character stupid for the sake of the plot advancing. And you can agree or disagree with me on that one. I'm fine with that. But like when I see what Rudius is capable of, and he's pulled off some pretty dang good schemes here, and he's gotten a pretty good sense of other people as he's grown, especially since he's older than a lot of the people he meets mentally. You would think maybe, just maybe, he would. Oh, wait a second. This might not be the best idea. And sorry, I just saw this now, Pang. Hi. Thanks for writing a message. Just to say that. Oh gosh, and if you guys ever want to leave a message in the midst of these recordings, you can feel free to do so. My notes were blocking the comments. But I really do think with the Rudius that's been written so far, yeah, he could have been fooled by some of this, but he's not giving up his staff. He's too smart for that. Not that the staff would seem to have done much good for him. He couldn't possibly have known about the anti-magical, circle that's kind of down there that prevents him from getting out. But dude, really? You didn't bring Rouget along with you? You didn't bring Eris along with you? You don't think something could have been done? I think he's smarter than that. Now, give credit where credit's due. Now, the things I hate about this episode, we get the battle of the perverts in many ways here. Rudius versus Pax. Rudius, throughout this entire show, has shown disdain for the idea of certain amounts of consent, of people's personal spaces, of designing figurines, which, by the way, will be a very important next episode, that are anatomically correct in many respects, and many, many other things that show that he's a very terrible person, especially when it comes to sexual things. Now, we have Pax, who has no redeeming qualities whatsoever, is one of like, it's so easy to create a villain, here that everyone will hate automatically by making them someone who commits molestation, rape, or something like that. Because then, well, unless your mind is really twisted, you're going to go, oh, that's reprehensible and wrong, and I want them out of here and I want them dead. Yeah, that's a good reaction to have. But when it comes to writing that character, you've created, goodness gracious, what's the one I like here? Something cheap. You've made something cheap that's easy to hate. Like, oh, it's easy to hate a Nazi. It's easy to hate a communist. It's easy to hate something simple like a something like this because we know those things are wrong. We know to, force people to do what they shouldn't be doing. What you want them to do instead is an evil action because you're controlling other people's lives instead of allowing them to be themselves. You create a person like him who is a sexual assaulter multiple times over, has no long-term strategies besides, hey, I exist so I can continue to do this evil action that makes people hate me. Well, there's no substance to that. And like, part of me thinks the only reason someone like Pax exists is to say, well, there's a good way to be a pervert, and there's a bad way to be a pervert. When, when the answer is no, neither's good. Putting Rudius and his perversions against someone like Pax does not make him the better character. It makes them both terrible in different ways. Now, has Rudius done the things that Pax has done? Slightly. He's done a couple things to Eris we've talked about before. He did walked in on his parents, having sex together, and Lily in the bathtub. Oh, no, actually, that was Paul. I'm sure Rudius at one point attempted to do that. And we've got him walking into Roxy's room, watching her as she undresses. Like, these are terrible things, and yet you want us to laugh at them? And then you make a character like Pax who is supposed to go, oh no, this is evil and wrong. How can he say these terrible things? Which, by the way, is also undercut with the same writing you just used there to make me despise this character, which, hey, I do. I despise him. You know what? It's easy to do so. I'd have to be an idiot otherwise. But he's making these horrific statements about what he's going to do to Roxy when he catches her, about how he's going to treat her and what he's going to make. He's going to make Rudius watch, and he's probably going to kill Rudius and make Roxy watch him murder him. And you make a joke about it. Yeah, there's a logic there that Rudius brings to the table, but that's something that should happen after he wrestles with what just was said to him, which is one of the most horrific things you can say to a person about what you can do, about the great evil that you can perform here. And it's things like this that really bring this series down in ways that I utterly despise. Because I'm not saying you can't have a character like Pax. Like, look, sometimes it's just nice to have a villain who's a villain. Like, make it entertaining. This guy's nobody. He's a loser. The only reason he has power is because he's a prince. Is because, as we'll see in the next episode, he finagled some things with his brother. Like, there's nothing interesting about this character. Get rid of him. Find something of substance to bring to the table that is fun. And this is just not fun. This is, in fact, just horrific. And especially with how it's treated. I imagine you said these things to a person and they talked about something else that undermined a different part of what you were talking about. But let's address the worst thing first, because yes, the fact that Pax hasn't thought ahead, and how is Roxy supposed to know that Rudius is there? He hadn't thought that far in advance because he's an idiot. That's something to be called out, and that could have been a funny scene. But instead, there's the juxtaposition of this horrific statement that was just made versus the logic destroying statement that Rudius makes. And it's poor writing to do that. Like, so what needs to happen here is you can have your character say this despicable thing, have Rudius react appropriately, instead of also worrying, oh no, did he cuckold me? Did he have Roxy to himself? Did he take her? And if that was true, why aren't you more concerned for Roxy? If that had happened, that's what I would be concerned about. Did this man do something terrible to my mentor? And instead, we have this. I'm just going to move on because I think I could talk about that scene even more, but my anger is starting to rise, and it's probably for the best that we don't linger on that. So, episode 20, entitled "The Birth of My Little Sister, the Maid." So we flash back once more to the Mana cataclysm that happened at Rudius's home. Happened everywhere, but for them, they saw it there. As his family separated by the blast, but before then, Aisha kind of calls it pretty, and yeah, it looks very pretty. But it's going to be very horrific what it does. But yeah, as a child watching that, of course you're going to think it's pretty. And Lilia starts to panic and covers her as the blast, hits them, and they end up underwater, thousands of miles away from home. As the opening plays, Lilia gets them onto the surface. She helps Aisha breathe again and hugs her, and they find that they're in the Shirone Kingdom. And as they go through uh, for help, because they know that's where Roxy is based on the letters that Rudius has been receiving. So this is a great play on Lilia's part because she doesn't know the politics of what's going on here. It makes perfect sense for her to do what she does, and hoping that if they find Roxy, she'll be able to help them. Like logic makes perfect sense. But when they reveal this information, it just so happens to be Pax who hears it, so he imprisons them as he's. Oh, by the way, he's in the middle of bride in the middle of the day chasing around like a maid or a servant or something like that, and about to do to her what he plans to do to Roxy too, and like in broad daylight. Mm. So that's our opening scene. So opening scene. Like I said, Lilia's plan makes perfect sense. I think it's very logical on her part. It's not her fault that she gets blasted thousands of miles away from home and ends up in a place that, oh, well, maybe, if we find, this person who has worked with our family before, he has connections here at the kingdom, we can get back home. That makes perfect sense. It is not her fault. This family is run by a bunch of incompetents who have terrible children who have probably been raised by a terrible parent. So I don't know if we ever meet like the Shirone king and queen at some point in time, but obviously they suck at their job because the children that we do see here suck. Sometimes it's not the parents' fault. Sometimes they're just bad seeds that will reject everything a good parent will offer them, and tell them to do. When I see multiple, I start to think maybe it's the parents' fault. So yeah, there's no repercussions for actions. No one tries to rein them in. Like I don't know if the author's thinking about, oh, well, how do these kids end up the way they do? And if he didn't, that's on him because we're products of our natures, we're products of our environment. So these two merging together make us into who we are. So I'm seeing somewhere something helped make Pax into who he is. And I'm guessing it was poor parenting. Now, I don't have proof of that. If someone who has actually read the light novels knows more, you can tell me more. Comment down below. Like, I'd love to hear what you have to say, but it's just horrendous. And through no fault of her own, Lilia and Aisha are now essentially slaves to the prince because he also yeah, yeah, wants to get Roxy back. So maybe someone that she knows as hostages, and again, because he's fat and stupid, and the only thing he thinks about is sex all day, there's nothing to his character. We end up in a situation where he hasn't thought ahead of, well, how would Roxy know that they're there as, his prisoners? Yeah, it's just bad. Moving on. Rudius is still trapped, muses about how, he's a former jobless bum, and now in a free apartment in Shirone, it's cramped, it's a little dark and dank, and the food's not the best, he can't get out, but you know what? It's free, which is actually in a pretty funny scene, I'll give it that. And as he attempts to escape the trap still, his magic will activate for a bit, but then it'll stop. He begs, Eris and Rouger to help him in the door down to this dark cellar, what have you, prison opens, and out comes a man named Zenoba, who we find is the third prince of the Shirone kingdom. And Zenoba then brings out the Rougered figure, which was given to him by Ginger, was her name, I think. Was it? Yeah, Ginger was her name. And asked Rudius where he got it because he's fascinated by it. And Rudius, that somewhat tactically decides to lie about where he got it, fearing it might be illegal there. So he's kind of gauging his reaction. So he says that, he found it by chance in the demon continent. And Sonoba had figured that it made it and asks how he found it, who the artist was, and he grows despondent when Rudius doesn't have the answer for it. Since he also has the Roxy figure that he brings out that Rudius made forever ago, that had made its way all the way to this empire, to this kingdom. Now, he tells Rudius that Roxy had fled when Pax's sexual harassment became too much. Imagine that. And he then praises the workmanship of the figure, going into a lot of detail in a very otaku kind of way. Otaku, for those who don't know, are like your ultra fans, especially in Japanese culture. You got mech otaku, you've got slice of life otaku, you got different gunpla as opposed to mech otaku. Like they're just into the figures. He's kind of like that. And this kind of makes Rudius happy that someone else appreciates his work, especially when they talk about, the anatomically correct parts of the figure. And Rudius, as he's looking over the figure, realizes the mole under her armpit is gone, which Zenoba reveals he removed because he thought that it detracted from its beauty, which of course makes Rudius angry because how dare you get rid of this unsolicited, uh, unasked figure I made of someone else without their permission. Yeah, I made anatomically correct. I can only say that so many times. And he's the one who actually compares him to an otaku, claiming for figures and like at conventions. But this is only after Zenoba realizes that Rudius, since he knows this much information about the figure, has actually given himself away as the one who actually made it. So he begs for him to be made his master, so that he can learn how to make them too. And Zenoba grows angry because he can't get rid of the barrier around Rudius, so they decide to work together and figure out a way out of this. Meanwhile, Eris, Ruijerd, and Aisha are looking for Rudius, who they find is imprisoned in the dungeon when they talk to some of the guards. And the guards then ask them to help them save their families, who are likewise imprisoned elsewhere, which makes Ruijerd's earlier desire to assault the castle come closer to reality. So my boy got what he wanted. The guards say that they can't act openly because, if they do and something goes wrong, well, their family is going to pay the price. So they beg them, who are outsiders, for help, and they agree to it. Ruijerd asks Eris to watch over Aisha, which she agrees to, as Ruijerd leaves to save, the other people. I like the joke Rudius makes. It's the second time he's done something like this, and like I get it. As some, if I had ended up in that same situation, I probably would have cracked the same joke of like how amazing this apartment is. It's free. Nothing's. It's not the best location, but you know what? I can't get out of it, and that's great. I'm there with him. Like that kind of sarcastic humor, I get. Then we get to Zenoba, and Zenoba is a character that, as we progress through this series, I don't exactly know where I land on how I feel about him, because there are certain aspects about where he goes from here that I like, and there are others, like what's brought up in this conversation here, that I kind of despise. Now, I question whether to actually bring this up earlier, but I think he might, in addition to some other things we learn about him later on, he might be on the spectrum somewhere. And it's kind of easy for someone to say, and I want to be respectful to people who are, because it just seems like, well, if anyone's wacky or weird and out of the ordinary, they're automatically on the spectrum. But I would point to as hyperfixation on things and stuff like that, to where I would maybe build up a bigger argument on that. I'm not a doctor; I can't diagnose such matters, but that's where I see him as like as someone who truly gets into things. The hyperfixation, maybe Asperger's would be what I'd throw in there. That's kind of interesting. What we find out about him in the next part of the episode is interesting, and how he's a little different than everyone else. That's fine, but it's this part of it's something that happens later on, so I can't say that. But for right here and now, he's serves as a plot device to get Rudius out, and and to get Rudius out of something that he brought on himself. I'm not big on that. It's not the worst thing in the world this story has done. Obviously, there are things I hate more and I don't like more. But yeah, it's we found someone else who, at the same time, I also do like it as a call back to something Rudius had done way earlier in the story that had affected. We had seen this figure come into Sharone before and stuff like that. Uh, didn't Roxy also see it too? I can't remember. The prince definitely saw Pax. So that's set us up something that happened earlier, but once again, it's under that whole Mushoku Tensei bridge of over sexualization, especially of underage women. Oh, yes, Roxy's not underage, but look how she's drawn. We know exactly what's being done here. You can't fool me. So, yeah, there's more to his character that I do like, and there are aspects later on I will praise more. But for right now, I don't know exactly where I stand with him. So, in light of that, let's just move forward. Zenoba attempts to find a way to destroy the magical barrier, and Rudius asks if he has anyone who's an expert on them, and he says that he doesn't because he traded his last servant and guard for the Roxy figure. Rudius then promises to train him as an apprentice if Zenoba gets him out of there, and Zenoba leaves. Outside of the castle, we didn't see Eris wonder what's going on. She sees like soldiers running around, and Aisha tells her that there is certain equipment that is used in the castle to restrain someone when he loses control. He's what's known as a blessed child, and the kingdom highly values him and treats him with great care. And she further tells Eris that blessed children are people born with special powers outside the magical norm that allow them to perform feats, other people can't. That a blessed child in question, who, as we see in silhouette, is Zenoba, has enhanced strength and accidentally tore off his younger brother's head when he was 3, which is a very horrific thing to do, by the way. That would really mess a person up, you would think, but sure. Eris then thinks that she wants to fight him because we've got a little Goku here. It's not one thing I do like about Eris as well, and it's revealed that Zenoba stole in to Pax's room, picked him up by the head in order to free Rudius, as Eris and Aisha and some of the other guards come inside the castle, and Pax threatens their families if they don't help him escape. And Eris reveals Rouge de Super is there to free them, their families. So they then turn on Pax, since they originally served Zenoba, who we found out gave them up so that we could get stuff like the Roxy figurine. Yeah, a great character. Pax is almost killed by Zenoba, who's about to crush his head, essentially. So he promises to free Rudius, but Zenoba, in the process, accidentally breaks one of his arms. And in that, Rudius is freed, making him realize that he had more friends in the palace than he originally thought. In the morning, Ruja returns with Lilia and the guards' families as Rudius realizes this all happened when he rescued Aisha, which then let them know who he was and to start thinking about working against Pax's desires. That's something they all wanted to do, but now that they have someone competent like him around, the team he had around him, yeah, makes a lot of sense. Ginger purposely gave the figure to Zenoba so that he would go to Rudius since she knew how much he loved stuff like that, and got him into the plan and got Rudius to be freed. Now, later on, we see Rudius, patting Aisha on the head, but before that, excuse me, in the midst of that, Zenoba arrives and throws him into the air, declaring him his master. We get a cute little, little hijinks moment, cartoony fall down, and he falls down in pain. Later, Rudius is gifted the holy relic by Lilia, and he thanks her as he finds a necklace made by Sylphie in there as well, who had planned to give it to him on his 10th birthday. And Lilia hugs him and wishes him happy birthday. But instead of just thanking her for doing something no rational person would do, he instead focuses on the fact that her breasts are touching his body through her clothes. Even though she's wearing clothing. We can't be adult about anything here. We have to be adult about things here. And she remarks that oh, Rudius, you just haven't changed. You silly little boy. You're harmless. But she's also glad that he's safe, and he says the same to her. That part, sweet. He then compliments Lilia for raising a bright daughter like Aisha, but Lilia ruins that by saying that if she doesn't recognize his greatness, she's not that bright, which is a horrible thing to say about your child. Lilia then flees inside a carriage for the moment as Aisha approaches and asks Rudius a question to see if she can be allowed to join him on his journey. Now, Aisha says Lilia told her once that she's going to one day serve her half brother, but she doesn't want to given his massive perversions. And I totally get it. It makes perfect sense for her to do so. However, um, and she tries to bait him by saying that one day she'll grow up to be just as voluptuous, her words, as her mother. Now, to his immense credit, Rudius gently hits her on the head and says, children shouldn't say such things. Where was this character this entire story? He gives her his headband to remember him by, and they reconcile a bit. And they then go on their separate ways, promising to meet again as she reveals that she figured out that he's actually her big brother, Rudius. And as they leave, we get to another scene where Rudius dialogues an addendum where Pax and Zenobia were both blamed for what happened and exiled under the kingdom under the false idea of studying abroad, as Zenobia wails that his master isn't with them. Let's talk reunion scenes. The Grey Rat family is kind of messed up in many regards. I wouldn't want that to be my family by any stretch of the imagination. So the fact, yeah, I'm bringing some chronological snobbery into this. I will fully admit that. Chronological snobbery, for those who don't know, is like looking back at the past and saying we're the more enlightened ones now because we do these things. Some of that may be true, but others of this is not understanding it in light of what's happened there. That like, hey, those reforms we think should be a thing aren't going to be a thing. But the fact that Lilia is raising her child to be a maid for Rudius really irks me. And not just because of who Rudius is, like in general, the idea. Because yes, she's not, Paul's wife. Well, maybe they had changed that at a certain point in time. They kind of refer to each other as wives at a certain point in time. So you would think that would like raise the station up for any children from that union. But no, we're just going to teach her to be just like mom. Keep her in a place, not advance her in any way, shape, or form. And she's going to choose to do this out of her own free will, even though that's the only thing she's ever known. And when later things happen later on, I'm going to have things to say about that too. So that really irks me. What irks me as well is the words are the words that come out of her mouth in description of like, oh, well, I've recognized that he's kind of a pervert too, so I can say these things, and then he'll keep me along. Which, oh man, I don't even know if I have time to dissect that. And, like the horrificness of thinking that as a 6-year-old child. Where are you hearing this? Who put this in your head? It's also she reveals it's also her brother here. So she knows that and she chooses to say this anyways. So that's clearly not a character choice. It's clearly an author choice to say this. Which I don't know. I'm trying to call a SWAT team on this one. I'm concerned. Many things I'm concerned about. This is what I'm concerned about author-wise here too as well. How how can you say these things? How can you write these things and said, "Yep, got it, nailed it, said the perfect thing," and I'm gonna let people know it's okay because Rudius is gonna be the one to say, "Hey, you shouldn't be saying that. You're a child." when he said worse things about children younger than her, about women physically his age and mentally his age and even in between that are way worse. I don't buy it one bit. This is clearly author. Okay. There's another show that's airing right in this anime season. It's called, what was it, Sayonara Dragon Life or something like that. It's so stupid. So it's got your typical fantasy setup. And, the humans, elves, beastkin, and stuff like that. And one of the minor characters, oh my gosh, this is so stupid, is a cow beast woman who produces the milk for the town that is our main setting for this show. Why? Because it's the author's barely disguised fetish. He thought, oh, well, if beasts can't exist and a cow woman would exist, and well, she can provide all that milk for the rest of the town because I'm curious about what would happen there. That's, I don't know if that's exactly what's happening here, but it's what it made me think of. And it's despicable. Like, I hate barely disguised fetishes in this way. Like, look, there are all things that we like, sexually, that it's not wrong inherently, but like when it comes to stuff like this, why are you including this in your work? This is why I don't like shows like this because this is brought up and yet, oh no, you shouldn't be saying that you're a child. And yet nothing about Rudius makes me believe in what he just said. Nothing. It's like, because earlier on in the series, so I'd better have a sister. That's better than having a brother. Because how she'll look. He says other awful things that makes me very worried for this child. Even though I know what happens later on, it still concerns me. But as far as wrapping up everything there, the whole Lilia thing, keeping the box, it's out of duty and obligation. Yeah, sure, I can finagle my way to her character, keeping the holy relic around and safe at the cost of everything else. Which kind of brings me up to the point that how did she keep that when she was in prison? Weren't all her things taken from her? And wouldn't, I don't know, Pax have noticed if he had looked into this? Maybe kind of similar designs to a certain person, he has unwell feelings towards. Wouldn't that be something that he would have taken? Because that sounds perfectly in character for him. So I don't know. I'm ready to wrap things up. I know that episode, especially, I felt really down on, but you're going to be surprised by the grades I give. So episode 18, I've given that a B minus. We've got a solid enough setup here um, with what's going on, in the episode proper. With the reunion. Excuse me, Roxy's family. Like that's honestly my favorite part of what we've discussed. But it's brought down by other things of how women are treated in the episode. So B minus there. 19 C minus. Rudius being Rudius in many different ways just ruins that episode. Like Rudius ruins everything. Episode 20, I'm actually giving it an A minus. I know you're probably all shocked, given how I was ragging on a bunch of things, but those are smaller things for the most part. Like it's good enough. You've got the reunion scenes in there. You've got the taking down of Pax, thank God. We've got the introduction of Zenobia, who, many flaws aside, is still interesting enough to me as a viewer. And you've got setting up for the rest of the season and them continuing on their path. Sure, that works for me. So yeah, that's it for this one. Thank you all for listening. Once again, I apologize for how late it's been since the last episode was recorded. I would like to do these more often. I have more free time now. I'm hoping I might be able to do this next semester too, but the problem is I'm taking about the same amount of classes that I took last semester as I'm trying to graduate a little earlier and get into this pastoral work at one point in time. So we'll see what happens. Hopefully, I'll be able to get more of these up. Who knows? These just kind of release when they're able to be released. So thank you all for listening. Please, if you get a chance, leave a 5-star review on your podcasting platform of choice. Or if you're listening to this on YouTube, like this video, comment below, subscribe to Systematic Geekology or the Amazon Ministries podcasting pages. You can email me at whydon'tlikePodcast@gmail.com. If you're interested in my own fiction writing, you can find my works at starvingwritersguild.com or on Amazon if you search the name MC Ashley. You can also find me podcasting on Systematic Geekology and Let Nothing Move You. Special thank you to Joshua Knoll for the music he provides for the podcast. With all that in mind, I spent a lot of time discussing what I don't like about Mushoku Tensei. You know what I do like? You listeners. I like you. So see ya, Space Cowboy.